I've been thinking about complex versus complicated a lot lately, especially as it relates to ways of knowing, ways of relating, and what might be happening in a therapy context. So very briefly, for those of you who may not have heard this distinction before, someone called Rick Nason, who was an American professor, he made this formal distinction between systems that are complex or complicated. And in really simple terms, a complicated system is something that's predictable, controllable, designable. Problems in a complicated system can be addressed through rules and logic. Complex systems, on the other hand, are not clearly predictable. They're self-organizing and emergent. So complex problems involve too many interrelated parts and too many unknowns to be addressed meaningfully by the use of rules. So a car engine would be an example of a complicated system, whereas a human body would be an example of a complex system. My sense is that there is a preference in most of us to relate to oneself as a complicated system. That is, that there is something controllable, manageable, and predictable about our circumstances. If we are complicated, we can also be predicted. If we are complicated, we can follow a set of sequences or rules that we can always trace back, imagine forward, design, refine with a certain level of confidence. Therefore, if we can make a case for being complicated, then we might feel safer. So the weight of responsibility sits largely on our own shoulders, based on our first-most ability to accurately map out and hold tight to our complicated set of inferences and causations, this kind of thing. If we're complex, however, where will that leave our sense of agency? Won't we be overwhelmed with some kind of agonizing anxiety about our powerlessness in navigating our own ship? And yet, when we have an experience that provides us with unmistakable evidence of our complex nature, we feel something awesome and satisfying take hold. A setting down of the weight of that complicated responsibility. Now the actions of Sisyphus have a force external to his own, and now he is part of a great movement that relieves him of the weight of the stone. There is something counterintuitive about how the apprehension of complexity feels. It is not an overwhelming terror, as we so often imagine it would be. In our complicated mindsets of daily functioning, we might believe we are buttressing against a more chaotic and frightening alternative, some passive and weakened position of being tossed around by the whims of the universe. Instead, moments of insight where we apprehend the complex nature of experience but for a moment may remind us of our fullest form of animation, immensity, and influence. Touching the gestalt can be a remembering, not a forgetting, of our percipience, but it comes with a dropping of our anxiety and a reverse hug of vibrant, warming, complete light. It opens us up wholly, 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 seeing the whole world reflected in you, the whole you reflected in the world, all the ways you cannot know with your brain, all the ways your body vibrates in synchrony with the trees. We experience our separateness, perhaps so that we are able to operate from a place of complicatedness. Perhaps that's the whole point, so that we can map systems, solve problems, design new pathways. Tuesday follows Monday, and seeds today will grow into trees tomorrow. But when we're not trying to solve a problem, when we're not trying to redundancy check a system, when we are simply trying to relate, A complicated worldview will treat a sphere as a circle. We will lose dimensionality and possibility. That is what we do when we forget to take the unconscious into account with the human psyche in therapy. And that is what we do in relationship with one another when we assume that cause and effect tell us all we could possibly need to know. In my therapy work, I have found that we think that an emotion will overwhelm us and lead to impulsive action. But once the groundwork has been laid to stabilize the system, we often come to find something counterintuitive. It is when I most open up to the emotion in my body that I feel the clearest confidence to choose what I will do with my actions. One does not instantly bleed into the other. An apprehension of an emotion energizes us to take control over how we then go to move our body. But if we relate to emotions as though they are complicated processes rather than complex, we run into all sorts of problems. A complicated map of anxiety in relationships doesn't account for the numerous interrelations across time, space, physiologies, and linguistic constraints. I know this because I used to try and map them out in my clinical training. These lengthy diagrams and clinical formulations of inputs and outputs, reinforcement loops and bidirectional arrows. A mess of an attempt to represent something logical, confidently redesignable and interchangeable with just the right intervention in the right spot. And it's true that there is a way that even in a psychodynamic form of therapy, like what I use now, we still predict points of intervention. We still predict likely effects and a rough conceptualization that could be mapped out in a complicated form. But it is with an understanding that these are simply topographical waypoints of a complex structure that can and will always surprise us in its revelation. We await the surprises. We pay attention when they show up. We take them seriously, perhaps more seriously than the points in between that led us there. We enter into the awe of their arrival, open up to the insight of their mysterious appearance, and let the intimacy of the shared experience create its own kind of relief, refrain, repair. The stream of light that bursts into the room to reveal something from the invisible, and the way that this light lets us see one another in hallowed vibrance, clean, sharp, clear, close. For a moment, we are both part of the light, while also being part of our separate bodies. And the entire structure of experience shifts in that radiant intimacy. Anxiety is the noise signal that keeps us from such experiences. But it is our complex nature that can provide the moments of remedy required. Not our prediction, nor our order-seeking brains. It is our complex bodies, embodied within relationship, harnessing a sphere of complex interrelationality that can allow for the revealing, surprising, reorienting, clarifying nature of surprise. Surprise cannot be predicted. Surprise is not part of a complicated system. And what would life be without surprise?